Good evening. We'll start the Finance Commission meeting of 5/26. We're here now to get an update on the revised budget prepared by Town Manager and the CFO, Austin and Anna. We got it late this afternoon. I took a look at it. I assume hopefully you all had a chance to take a quick look. I need some help. So what I'd like to do is, if everyone's agreeable, ask Anna and or Austin to kind of walk us through the letter, the changes, and we'll go from there. Anna or Austin, which would...
So I guess just as a brief introduction, I want Anna to run more point on this. Anna's been working extraordinarily hard on the budget prior to all of this craziness, then readjusting the budget for the budget presentation a month ago. And then tonight we can kind of talk about the gap that we've been internally discussing. You know, it's... Anna and I have worked pretty hard to be conservative in our budgeting, try to model revenues as conservatively as possible. That's honestly the way to get some stable free cash and things like that. This budget process, though, has been, you know, for me managing people during it, but Anna has been kind of doing backflips in terms of getting this to work. I haven't necessarily had to manage the reductions in the budget that Anna's kind of taken on. So this is a very thorough document that Anna put together. So first off, like, the conversation doesn't end in this meeting. Anyone who has additional questions after this, feel free to check in with us. We can, if you want to email us directly, we can then disseminate responses to the entire group, so you're not like emailing amongst one another and things like that, and any open meeting law type of stuff. But what Anna has laid out in here is a plan for, and Anna, I have the draft one from earlier today. The exact number Anna will hit on, over $1 million that we're looking at in terms of lost revenue and cuts to state aid. So honestly, this is what we can come up with right now based off of the information that we have to date and what we've had in conversations with different levels of government of what we can expect in terms of like CARES Act money and things like that, and figuring out to the best of our abilities how to best utilize that money from the state. Some of this stuff the way Anna may explain it, it may seem a little counterintuitive because there is an example of something where it's like you don't actually put it in the budget. We should be doing it as CARES Act money. It doesn't mean that it's not important for the long term, but the way to get it paid for now is with CARES Act money. So Anna will walk the group through some of those things, but we've tried to present a path that we could, I would say it's somewhat of a path of least resistance that doesn't have job reductions and gets us to a balanced budget. When we start tinkering around with some of the other stuff, as I kind of said in the initial budget presentation, it's gonna be a harder process to kind of get everything balanced out. So again, like we don't have all the answers on this. In all honesty, we're probably going to be coming back to you in the fall to readjust the budget again when we have additional understandings of like additional property tax paying periods. You know, if there's any bounce back that happens in any type of like motor vehicle purchases this summer or anything like that, that hits our excise tax. But we're trying as hard as possible to make the necessary adjustments to the budget so that we can maintain a pretty decent level of service to the community and not have to make like wholesale cuts to staffing or like departmental reductions and things like that. So, you know, it's a lot of information in here, and I'll kind of kick it over to Anna to get into some more of the specifics. And any specifics in this meeting or outside of this meeting, we can kind of walk through specifically why we're proposing it and why we think it could be, again, path of least resistance on trying to make this work. And putting this all together.
Okay, thank you, Austin. Just one thing, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, somehow I did something and I've lost the view here. I don't know that.
In your Zoom, we can still see you. Did you do enter full screen or speaker view?
I was just, I did something. I was looking down below at the, I can't figure out what I did.
Can you see can you see anything for Zoom? Is there like a small box?
No, I don't
But
see
like
anything.
Is there the little blue box on the bottom with the blue with the little white camera in it?
Oh, there it is. Yeah. There we go. All right.
All right, there you go.
Hey.
I'm sorry.
We solved your problem, right? Is this meeting over now?
I'm good with your budget.
Thanks. All right, Anna, sorry.
So I think if this works for everybody, I'm going to share the screen and just pull up the memo that went to all of you this afternoon. Thank you for your patience on that. I was working down on the wire to get that assembled. And then I can just kind of go through and then we can do questions as I walk through the memo. So let me just make sure I pull up the right memo here. And I'm going to share my screen so that we're all looking at the same thing. Okay. All right. Let's see. Can you all see the memo on my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Actually, let me just make sure I've got the right. I think this is the right one. So I'm just gonna skip. I'm gonna skip the opening paragraphs. They're just sort of explaining some things that I think we've talked through a bunch, just to kind of memorialize some of those earlier conversations about our internal process and why we're coming back with this updated information. And then we're just requesting that this this letter and the attachment be accepted sort of as a supplement to the town manager's FY21 budget. I'm also going to sort of really brief through the background because it's something I think we've talked about in these meetings a few times about the purpose of conservative budgeting and also sort of what the kind of larger economic picture is as a result of COVID-19. Some of that was also presented by the economist Michael Goodman a few weeks ago to town council. So I think that's just sort of memorializing that we got some information on that. We also in this group have talked about the historicals on local aid. So this was providing you all with that data for your reference, so you can spend more time looking at those numbers. But it's laying out sort of how the past can inform some of our thinking in terms of what we might need to accommodate for FY21, and the same thing on excise taxes. We went into some of this last week, and happy to go back and revisit it, but I'm going to sort of skip through it right now. But it's just providing the background for some of the gap in the decisions. One thing that we didn't get into a ton of detail last week that I'll briefly touch on are our current FY20 projections. So that's the table on page 4. And just so that folks know, and I didn't go into a ton of detail on this, but I can, if people are interested, I can show you some more there. Basically what we've done here is showing you what the budgeted revenues were and what we're currently projecting, and then whether that's over or under our original budget. So the general way that this is done is we basically say, we take a snapshot, and this snapshot was as of the end of April, so this doesn't have May or June. So there's a big month of May that we're not capturing right now to see how the COVID-19 crisis has impacted these revenues, in June as well. So what we stop it as of the end of April, and we basically said, okay, in previous years, here's sort of the rate of collection typically for the rest of the year. And so that's how we normally would apply that projection for the rest of the year. This year we said, here's what we normally would project out for the rest of the year based on the historical rates of collection. But then we applied a bit of a discount to many of these, in particular meals and rooms, and a few others, just knowing sort of the likely impact of COVID-19 on those. So, and I just want to make a brief note. I'm not going to get into it a lot here, but if people, when they are reading this memo, find this confusing, I'm happy to chat with you about it. You're going to note when you look down at our property taxes, it's going to look like we have a problem there. We don't really have a problem there. It's because our property taxes are on a calendar year and our budget is on a fiscal year. And so when you use that same snapshot point in time and then project out, you're not capturing the fact that the last 2 quarters of FY20 are at a higher rate than the first 2. So this will catch up. We think that's going to land pretty much in line with budget. So we should we should be ending with a couple $100,000 above budget for FY20 revenues, which is good. It's not as successful as we've been performing there previously. So it just proves the purpose of why we really try to budget conservatively. So if you have these unexpected economic downturns in the middle of the fiscal year, you have some buffer to accommodate that. So you're not, it's for example, we've had a final quarter here that's been terrible. And so, but we seem to be weathering some of that final quarter sort of stormy activity because we budgeted conservatively. So that just sort of proves why we take this position. Does anyone want to get into FY20 revenues, or should I just keep going and get into the 21 stuff?
21.
21, perfect. Okay. So I had, hope you all can see this. I had provided all of you with some preliminary numbers last week on what we were thinking about for FY21. And I should start, this is going to be there's some really important nuance to this that I think will be confusing at first, but it's really important to talk through. So the numbers that I'm going to walk through here are really not much different from the numbers that we discussed last week that sort of had a gap of like 1.3 to 1.4. These numbers are basically in that same ballpark, but I've applied a strategic approach to how we adjust to those likely downgrades. And so what I am recommending that we do is for our local receipts for FY21, that the budget actually, that we actually make adjustments in revenue. And I should just say, just as a premise, the town council votes, appropriates the budget, but doesn't actually vote the revenues. So but the budget the appropriations need to match the revenues. So just sort of how these kind of work out is actually there's sort of more interaction we have with the state in some ways on how where we assume our revenues are coming in. Like they actually will, they have to approve each of these categories on the sheet that we fill out with them every year with the DOR, the Division of Local Services, to get our tax rate approved every year. And they have parameters around what types of increases you can provide for each category, because they don't want communities to basically say, oh, well, I'm gonna take another $2 million in motor vehicle excise taxes. So I don't need to, I'm gonna pay for all these other things that aren't realistic. So they actually are quite stringent about the way that you budget your local receipts. And we, just as a premise, have an inquiry in with our representative at the DLS to make sure that they aren't going to be putting out any guidance on what they would be expecting folks to have on it's called your tax recap form, so that we don't have any issues with them on any of the assumptions that we've made from a budgeting of the revenue side of the equation. Anyway, that's a wonky thing that's more my problem than anyone else's, but just to kind of explain some of why I'm taking a nuanced approach here. So, is there a question? No. So for the local receipts, which are pretty much everything except for our state aid and our property taxes, I'm assuming and making a recommendation that the budget physically downgrade our motor vehicle, meals and rooms excise tax revenues below what was in the town manager's budget submission. And I will say we had already kind of tinkered with those a bit when we put together the town manager's budget submission originally. We believe that those should be pushed down lower in light of sort of the current trajectory of the COVID-19 crisis and the social distancing measures that have been put in place to respond to the crisis. So you can see here the reductions to motor vehicle, meals and rooms, and then the total at the bottom is $283,629. So that would be physically, we would take that out of the budget. So that means that we actually, when we physically take those down in the revenues of the budget, that means that there need to be associated line item reductions and or offsetting other revenue increases in order to balance the budget. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, because there are other local receipts that are likely to be impacted that I'm not recommending that we physically adjust downward right now in the budget, but that there are solutions that I'll speak about later in the memo that hedge against this issue. Because when I looked at this with other folks, such as the town council auditor and have pinged other communities on what they're thinking, folks are generally assuming downgrades in quite a few categories. So if we take all of these in here and we physically reduce the revenue in the budget right now, we would then need another $218,000 of specific line item reductions. And I will show you later why I think that's not in the town's best interest at this stage.
Anna.
So anyways, so for right now, yep.
Hi, it's Karen. I just one comment. Why are we not looking at the real estate taxes? I mean, I realize that they are a calendar year, not a fiscal year, but why are we not looking at them to see if indeed the taxes that were due the 1st of May are coming in a timely basis?
So from what we can tell, we think that they generally are. There isn't sort of enough there to kind of say like, okay, we can extrapolate from this. We think that we are generally okay there from a 20 perspective. I think the greater concern is if unemployment rates continue at the current rate and or God forbid increase over longer periods of time, then there's a trend there that we would be watching from collections, but we won't in the budget. We wouldn't proactively say like, well, there isn't something to take down for property taxes for next year. You have your underlying amount from you have your 2.5% plus your new growth. So there's not something that you can like properly from a budgeting perspective say like, well, I'm going to make those numbers different. I mean, unless we sort of said, okay, I'm going to just make my new growth number I'm going to say no new growth or something like that. So it would be highly unusual to tinker with property taxes at this point, which is why it makes it even more important that we be very sort of critically be very critical of sort of the other receipts in the budget to make sure that we are conservative across the board so that we're kind of hedging against particular areas being hit harder than others that we can't sort of fully realize right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does.
Okay.
Anna, question.
Yep.
On the miscellaneous revenues.
Yeah.
Okay, the bottom line, it's 3,000 and we're projecting.
Like what are those? Yeah, like what
can you talk about them a little bit?
I should have run a report to tell you what those are. Those swing wildly year to year, which is why they're not budgeted higher. And because of the way that the DOR requires us to sort of fill out our tax recap form, we typically keep miscellaneous lower because they're critical of like I said, trying to show increases there. But miscellaneous is not something we typically assume. Miscellaneous is more one-time revenue. I would have to run the report to see what that one-time revenue is for this year. But it could be things like, actually, for example, I could think of something off the top of my head. It might be departmental, but for example, we just got some FEMA money from like a 2018 storm that just came in this year. That's so far delayed. It's just general fund money. So it's just collected in like a miscellaneous, like one-time. It's sort of revenue that you're not assuming you'd be collecting and budgeting against. It's sort of revenue that kind of comes in after the fact. And so that's what's in there. I could run a report for you and give you more detail on what that is.
Okay.
But it's probably things like that. Like I think we got like $66,000 from FEMA from something from 2018. That's not something we budget against because it's erratic.
Okay. So, and another quick thing before you go on, about, I don't know if it was 3 weeks ago, it seems like this has been going on forever, but it seems about 3 weeks ago, I think we as a committee recommended that, we adjust this budget. And you and Austin were pretty convinced with local receipts saying that we're very conservative to begin with. You were comfortable with where they are. Now, you're eliminating excise, dropping them 25%, 25%, and 10%, which is pretty drastic, I think. But especially on the motor vehicle tax and the excise tax, maybe not the room tax. But so we had talked about the whole budget, thinking that we needed to readjust about a month ago. What brought on the sudden change with you guys?
So I think I will say that I was not 1,000% comfortable with what we put out with Austin's budget because at that point I only had about 2 weeks of revenue information that was COVID-19 related. So I pretty much froze the numbers at the end of late March. I don't think I had all of March at that point. No, I didn't have all of March. So I knew that it was reasonable to expect that we could not appropriately increase meals or rooms. And it was trying to determine, okay, how long, at that point it was unclear, like how long is this sort of social distancing going on? Is this something that is going to be more of a FY20 issue and FY21 will be largely intact, or is this going to be a longer term issue? And it felt extremely drastic at that point in time to make this type of change without sort of just coming out of the gate with it. So what we did was we knocked down meals and rooms. Motor vehicle, we sort of kept as is to sort of see how that was going to fare. And I think based on a lot of other communities had some flexibility to wait until later. We needed to get the budget sort of done based on the best information that we had. But this is something that we've been looking at. I've been updating every other week since then. And so this is informed by the fact that it's pretty clear that we're going to be sort of in a kind of in a new normal for a while, that I think it's unrealistic to assume that the unemployment rates will necessarily rebound quickly. And so to assume that folks are likely not making a ton of vehicle purchases, things like that. And so this is based off of just ongoing conversations we've been having with economists, with folks and our peers in other communities, and others, just to kind of get a sense for how people were sort of looking to kind of work. I mean, it's all completely, we're sort of shooting in the dark in some ways on this, because it's the impacts are not, it's not a crisis that's consistent with other crises that we've had in the past. So it's very hard to predict. And this is as a result of saying, you know what, based on how long it looks like we could be in sort of a new normal, we feel that the principle of conservative budgeting necessitates us making these adjustments. And furthermore, we're pretty sure the DLS will not approve of our tax recap if we don't make some adjustments that show that we are being responsible in terms of budgeting. So that's
just to echo some of the things that Anna said there. We were putting this budget together 2 months ago when we were originally supposed to present. A lot has changed in 2 months, and a lot has changed in the past month. There was a period of time where we thought we were going to reopen town hall pretty quickly and stuff like that. Right now, honestly, we just got the governor's proposal a week ago, or a little over a week ago, of what we were actually looking at in terms of businesses reopening and stuff like that. We're honestly, like I said, we'll probably be back in the fall. This is going to keep happening. Towns that have town meeting, they presented a budget in February. So they're on their second, third reiteration of the budget before they even had a town meeting. So, Anna and I are just doing our best to try to hone in on a number that we think can get a balanced budget. Otherwise, we've kind of talked about this and broached the topic before, but we could be looking at 1/12 budgets for the foreseeable future, which leads to some issues in terms of certainty of certain positions and stuff like that. But that may be the normal that we're looking at as well. This is a super, super difficult financial situation to try to project. So every day that we get more information, we're trying to incorporate that into how we're kind of presenting this budget.
I do.
I'm sorry.
Jen.
Go ahead, Jim.
No, go ahead, Jen.
Okay. Just a quick question. On the real estate taxes, am I correct that we're not looking at establishing a reserve because ultimately they get leaned and can be collected, so we're not taking into account where there might be bad debts?
Yes, that's correct for right now. Also, the thing is that a fair amount of properties, it's a bank paying property taxes. It's not the actual individual. In a town like Winthrop, there are a fair amount of individuals that are outside of their mortgages that do pay them. But we have a fair amount that come from banks, and until the banks fail or the banks stop offering mortgage relief to people and stuff like that, we think that we're pretty confident that our collection rate should still stay. We're in the high 80s, low 90s type of thing.
So the bank pays even if the homeowner doesn't?
Good question. So right now, those are federally backed programs that banks are offering in terms of mortgage relief. They're kind of forcing people to renegotiate their mortgages or pay upfront the whole amount for the quarter that they took off. So they would get that property tax. But that is a good question. The complete failure to payment if property tax gets paid, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Think that's I don't think they pay it just out of the goodness of their hearts, which is a fair point. But it seems like because of the mortgage relief programs, we've still seen a fair amount of payment. We had really high levels for the May 1st deadline.
Good. Okay.
Yeah. As far as we've seen, those payments are still being made. Sort of what's happening between, on the other side between the property owners and the mortgage companies or the banks, we don't have a full picture of that quite yet.
Great.
But so far the payments are still coming in.
Good. Thank you.
Were there any other questions before I?
Well, just to go back to what Austin was saying, how it's an incredibly hard budget to figure out. Everything, hopefully at some point will fall into place once we get a real number from the state that kind of fills in all the gaps, and everything else is guesswork. I mean, even on, excise tax, I think we're a little low, but I mean, those are relatively small amounts that we could disagree on or whatever. But once the state aid number comes in, everything kind of gets filled out. I don't think, to look back at 07, 08, 09 is I guess it's all we have to look at really, but I guess by the definition of the word, we're in a recession, but it's not like a recession from 08, 09 where, it was totally different. Now it's hopefully relatively somewhat short-lived, but I mean, it's obviously longer than we would have thought, like Austin said a month ago, but I'm hoping that we can recoup a little quicker, but I'll let Anna go on.
And I think just maybe Austin, if you have been on any recent calls that would be appropriate to share with some of the forward-looking sort of projections in terms of from a public health perspective. I don't know if there's anything there that's helpful just to put some of this in context.
Sure. I always defer to Meredith on this. She's on far more Department of Public Health calls than I am in communicating with the medical community, significantly more than I am. That said, I am on a fair amount of calls with like the Lieutenant Governor and MMA and MAPC, local mayors and managers and stuff like that. None of us are super excited about, unfortunately, what we think is coming this fall. We did a very good job earlier this year of, bending the curve. We still had a ton of people die, unfortunately. And we had a fair amount of people die in Winthrop. The changes that are going to have to come in terms of, and some of this stuff is we can regulate and make policy decisions on and stuff like that. That doesn't mean someone's going to be comfortable going into a restaurant with a mask on or those types of things. Like we don't know when cars, like the used car market is about to be flooded with Hertz going bankrupt. Does that mean we're going to get some motor vehicle excise tax? Maybe, but that also is assuming that people are going to want to buy cars when they're not going to work, when they use it the most. We're in this really weird point that I kind of keep echoing this to Anna, that we're going to keep trying to be as conservative as possible because there are so many variables that it becomes very overwhelming, but we're trying to focus on like the few variables that we do think. And that's why these three items like motor vehicle excise, people aren't going to be buying cars next year. Like it's going to go down. And it's just one of those, I mean, if people aren't leaving their house, why are they buying a car? Meals excise, we have less people eating out at restaurants. It doesn't matter what level restaurant it is, people are going to be spending less money at restaurants. And room excise, hotels are phase 2 at this point under a lot of restrictions. So right now, that's some point in June, but that's depending on what the governor says. So again, like we're trying to make these conservative measures to reduce revenue in places where we don't see like a comfort level of people re-entering these markets the same way that they were before. If this comes in the fall, like it's projected during a flu season, we're going to be looking at some of the same stuff that we're doing right now and we've done over the past 2 months. And we can have more mask wearing and PPE and hand sanitizing stations and all of that type of stuff. But if we have a lot of people that are sick, people are just gonna, for everyone's sake, it's gonna be people have to stay home again. And, you know, we acted on these because we know that we really confidently can assume reductions in revenue for these 3 items. So that's what we were focused on. And again, like I said, we will most likely be back in the fall when we have better information. I think it's just a reality situation, unfortunately.
Thanks, Austin. And then, so just to make sure I really hone in on the distinction here. So the excise revenues are ones that we believe should be formally adjusted downward in the budget assumptions for revenue. Separately, however, we are likely to see, based on sort of projections, based on trends that we're seeing for this year for other local receipts, likely to see some underperformance for other categories, which I have listed here: penalties and interest, fees, departmental, fines and forfeits, Medicaid. I am not recommending that we formally adjust those downward in the budget at the beginning of the year, but I am recommending that we set aside, and when we walk through the solutions, I'll point out where you can see these, set aside a set of contingency planning to accommodate solving for these once we can sort of see how things are going. Although some of those plans, I think, are plans that we would likely need to put in place at the very beginning of the year in order to properly realize needed savings. And I will just say, I bounced this off of some folks and they feel that it's a reasonable approach, and it is, as Austin notes, it's potentially not conservative enough, but that it's a reasonable approach for where we are. And so I just note here, I don't recommend revising those other local receipts downward at this stage, as reductions here would necessitate solutions that physically reduce the line items in the budget on the spending side. So we are recommending non-line item reduction solutions to solve for likely underperformance in those categories. We think that the non-line item reduction solutions would preserve our appropriation levels to ensure flexibility with staffing contingency planning should revenue projections improve. So basically, we wouldn't want the town to be in a position where we slash department budgets and implement harsh sort of staffing adjustments as a result of that, and then see things improve through the year. What we are suggesting is to hedge on the side of caution, put contingency plans in place, and if things look better, it may allow for sort of ramping up against those appropriation levels, but otherwise the goal would be to sort of just preserve those so that that level of flexibility could exist if things improve as the year goes on. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. So as Councilor Lettieri pointed out, state aid is obviously a really important piece of this conversation. Austin, I'm not sure if you're hearing anything differently, but I'm hearing it's certainly a 1/12 budget for the state for the month of July, which is, I think, no surprise. I heard that is probably at the least. I think that is probably a good thing because it's probably, I would say, if I'm trying to read into that, I would say that they certainly want to wait as long as they can to have the most recent up-to-date information. So I hope that will mean that we'll sort of have more certainty around whatever the local aid numbers that we get when we get them. So I believe that this is a similar amount that I talked through last week in terms of what I am suggesting we do to guess where we might be with state aid. So the previous economic downturns, we had pretty sharp reductions to our local aid, particularly the unrestricted government aid. So the state recently enacted major changes to Chapter 70, the education funding formula. So I personally think it's reasonable to assume that state officials will attempt to preserve some of that investment in Chapter 70, just to hold the course on all of the work that they've done there. In doing that, that will likely push them to have to make deeper cuts to the unrestricted government aid. So sort of looking at the previous recessions, sort of the data from the earlier recessions, we're recommending a downgrade of 4% for Chapter 70. So that level funds Chapter 70 with FY19 actuals. and then a cut of 10% for the unrestricted government aid. So that's level with 19 actuals plus an additional 5% cut. This may not be sufficiently conservative as it results in an overall 7% reduction to state aid. So if the state's facing a potential revenue loss of 10 to 20%, it's realistic to assume we could see deeper cuts here. And so we have to be mindful of that and have contingencies in place accordingly. So I read another scenario that said, as an example, if we got an 8% cut that would say just a 1% reduction of Chapter 70 to keep it in line with FY20, that would then push us to have a 20% reduction to unrestricted government aid to get us to an overall 8% cut. And that equates to over $950,000. So this is it's a really big deal what the state does here. And I think the proposal, which would reduce our revenues by $785,721, is sort of a responsible and reasonable assumption to make at this point. And so that's the $785 for state aid plus the $283,629 for the excise taxes. That equals our current revenue gap, which I'll show you in 1 second. And then we talked about property taxes briefly, not proposing any adjustments here, but we will have to continue to actively monitor it.
Anna, can I hop in about the state state aid as well? Just to put some things in context a little bit more of what Anna was talking about. What we're proposing when you add all this stuff up, we're looking at like between a 1.5% and 2%. The state revenue reduction that we're hearing about, if it isn't to the tune of $6 billion, is like a 14% reduction in revenue at the state level. Similar communities in the area are making 4 to 5% reductions in their budgets. So again, we're coming here, we cut the budget extensively before we even presented it a month ago. And we're coming again with a fair amount of cuts because, that unless the federal government is coming into play with some of these decisions, it's going to be very difficult for the state to be able to continue to fund all of the local aid in education at the same levels that they have in the past. So again, with kind of Anna's thinking through most of this stuff, we're trying to present reductions in the areas that we can be confident that there will be reductions to inform what we need to do on how we're looking at revenue on our end. Thank you.
So then getting into the 21, the sort of how all of that adds up to our gap and then what types of solutions we're talking about. So like I said, the 785, 721 plus the 283, 629, that equals our revenue gap, which is this number here, 1069, 350. And then additionally, I broached with folks in this group that as a result of being non-renewed by our insurer, Maya, we are likely to face some pretty steep increases on our premiums and have to take on some higher deductibles moving forward. So we have not been able to get a good sense of how steep that could be, but I was informed that at least a 10% increase would be appropriate. I've gone a little bit further just because I don't want us to be sort of underfunding that, and we will not know until after the budget is approved what the sort of response is to what the market will respond to from what we're putting together. So proposals are due to us the last week of June. So that 12% is just to hopefully make sure we're fully covering those costs. Should there be extra there, we could come to the council to move those funds around. So that's the revenue gap. Plus, on the spending side, that's the Maya replacement. And so our total problem right now from revenue we're physically taking out of the budget and money we have to now add back in is over $1.1 million. And so just again, that doesn't include the additional likely revenue shortfalls to our non-excise tax local receipts. And so solutions for those shortfalls above and beyond this identified gap is below. I just want to briefly mention something that Austin alluded to earlier. And so I know, and we agree with the the request from our Department of Public Health for enhanced staffing capacity to meet the needs of the COVID-19 response. We believe that there are opportunities to provide that capacity that would be in the best interest of the town fiscally, to take other avenues that are currently available due to relief that's being provided. Basically, CARES Act funds is not available. CARES Act funding is not available for budgeted items. So we would have to cut something to provide these additional funds here, or if we continue to sort of tee up spending against our COVID-19 emergency response lines and submit that for reimbursement to FEMA and for the CARES Act funding, we believe that funding could be reimbursed to us 100%. And so that is why we have not thought to cut something else to put that in. We are so supportive of increasing the staffing, and we are working with the with our public health director to land on a specific number there for her department for next year, and really for the end of this through the next month and into next year.
Yeah. So Anna, there's two items here. First is the public health one. I would give Meredith tons of money if I could. We're basically going to continue to use the CARES Act money for this, for everything that she needs. Anna, go into it's coming up on the screen.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. In the memo.
Something.
Don't sweat it. So with the public health, as much as it is a item that I would like to fund through the budget and secure funding for it for the longer term, it makes sense to do it through the CARES Act money for right now. If we are going to try to position additional money for the public health department versus some of these baseline needs of other departments, I don't necessarily want to hit the decisions of one department versus another in the conversations that you all have to have. And then with inspectional services, we're working with them right now on the increased hours that their inspectors would need for construction projects and the permitted locations like restaurants and things like that. For the other locations that need to self-assess and self-report concerning their following COVID guidelines, they will self-post those items within their own businesses. And we are we're working with BU graduate students and potentially through some of this CARES Act funding with Meredith to expand our ability to visit more businesses around town and be able to check in with them, check their status on certain items, make sure that they're in compliance with items. We're not looking to necessarily ding people or kill them with enforcement and stuff like that. But what we're trying to do is have a fair amount of people touching a fair amount of businesses. And it can't only be done by ISD. ISD does, restaurants they've been reaching out to and having face-to-face contact more during this public health emergency, but usually they're inspecting restaurants about twice a year. So we don't want to necessarily add a ton to that department right now. We're going to try to focus on that through the health department. That said, inspectional services has been something that's been on my radar for a while about how to potentially invest in or look at how it fits into the overall organization of the town government. So I just spoke with the ISD commissioner earlier today concerning the topic, some solutions we could potentially provide. They have their online web-based permitting is coming online hopefully in June. So that will alleviate some things in their office as well. But we're going to work hard to not necessarily have to come back to the table and ask you all for additional money for that department. What we're going to try to do is see if we can organize our way there to a real solution. So I know those are two items that had kind of come up in some of the conversations that you all have had with department heads. And Anna and I both wanted to make sure that everyone knew that we were cognizant of those things and that we're trying to figure out how to account for them to the best of our abilities.
Thanks, Austin. Getting into solutions now. So our total problem is this $1,154,322. And then the solutions down here explain how we close this gap and then plus solve for those other local receipts that aren't part of this specific gap. Let me see if I can fit all of this on my screen. Yep. Okay. So the things that I probably should have ordered this chart a little bit differently, but the solutions include a couple different categories of items: revenues, spending freezes, which aren't specific cuts to line items, but are contingency plans that we're developing right now, specific line item reductions, and then voted turnbacks from old special articles, which are technically would then be counted as revenues, but I wanted to give them a separate category. So just quickly on the revenues. So we are recommending that we assume a transfer from our general stabilization fund for FY21 to ensure a balanced budget. And the amount that we're recommending is $750,000. And I go into more detail on this transfer below, so I will revisit that. We're also recommending that we seek out relief from the federal government for the SAFER grant that the fire department and the town has taken on. So the SAFER grant provides for additional firefighters to ensure certain staffing levels. There is a relief portion of that grant, as we understand it, and from what I've seen in the HEROES Act, there is something in there that sort of looks like it makes sort of the opportunity to be granted financial relief there, even potentially a lower threshold to achieve. So we would assume pursuing a request for financial relief. So in FY21, for the local match, sorry, I should tell you that the grant pays for, I believe, 75% of it in FY21. We have a match of 25%. And so what we would do is we would request a waiver of our local match for the year, and that would then save us, the grant would then pick up our local match for the year. And so that is something that we're teeing up. One thing to be super nuanced about on this is that to the extent that those firefighters don't come on until later in the year, think of it as sort of a closed one-for-one situation. We've fully budgeted for them to be on for the full 12 months. It's sort of unclear what the timing will be in light of sort of things going on with Fire Academy and things like that. So our percentage would only be relevant for how long we actually would have them up and running. And so this amount, just think of those things as sort of a closed sort of one-for-one in that sense. So if, for example, we only would be responsible for $40,000 for the match, then the relief would be $40,000. So that's just something that we would count on pursuing. And then I'm just going to speak really quickly about these other items because these should also be considered revenues for the purpose of this budget. And then maybe folks on the call can actually educate me about the first one a little bit. So there is a special article that we've been rolling for the past couple of years, FY16 harbor dredging feasibility, and it was for $20,000. And there's been no recent spending in that, and so it would appear that that is something that has either run its course or is not as urgent a priority as previously maybe was. And so I'm suggesting that the town council vote to turn those funds back to help balance the budget for next year, since they have not been actively drawing down against the remaining balance of that special article. If that is an active issue, definitely please educate me on that. And then separately, FY18 town manager recruitment, similar, that those funds have been rolling over since FY18. It does not seem like an active urgent item there. So we would suggest that the council vote to turn those funds back to balance the budget for next year. So basically, instead of me potentially closing them at the end of the year, we can actually close out if there's remaining funds in special articles that are no longer being spent to close out to free cash. So I would suggest that we do not close those out to FY20 free cash and instead have the council vote to utilize those funds to turn those back for a solve for next year. So that's from a revenue side. Those are the revenue positive adjustments that we would be recommending. Are there any questions on a revenue side before I go on to the line item reductions, and then I'll speak about the spending freezes?
Anna, it's Karen.
Hi.
Of course, the biggie for me is the stabilization fund, $750,000. Now, where does that come from next year when we need it?
So actually, you know what? I'm glad you just asked that. I'm going to go down and talk about that right now before we move on. So I think just in general, and I should have started with this, the way that we approached how should we close this gap is to preserve staffing to provide essential services, particularly as we're continuing to respond to a public health crisis. We want to stabilize our short-term finances while continuing to maintain our long-term financial health. So this means using our reserves in a conservative manner to support ongoing essential services during the economic downturn. So the general stabilization fund right now, the current balance is $2.4 million. So the proposed transfer would be $750,000. We'd be left with a little over $1.65 million. So that is a 31% reduction of the current balance of the fund. But that proposed transfer overall is a 15% reduction to our overall undesignated fund balance, which is our total reserve. We don't believe that the rating agencies would penalize the town for using the funds in this manner to support essential services in FY21, as that's the very purpose of the fund. So the funds are set aside for stabilizing in times like this. And basically, sort of the underlying premise of them is to actually stabilize the tax rate. So basically, these funds provide the revenue instead of seeking adjustments from the taxpayers to fund essential services during economic downturns. So we think that it's a rainy day fund, it's raining, and we believe it would be appropriate. I would say the balance of that rainy day fund is likely to grow a little bit. As you saw, we are anticipating having some free cash, and the free cash policy would provide for deposits back in the fund. Would the deposits replenish that $750,000? No, I would not expect at this point it would fully replenish that, but it will chip away at that. And so our balance will be a little healthier than that 1,658,966. I expect it to be a bit above that. And then I also should just, oh yeah.
I was just, who determines what essential services are? Is that up to us, or is that up to the state, or whoever's auditing the books? Or
I think
who makes that determination?
I mean, I think it's up to the town council and the town manager to some extent. I mean, I think it's for us, essential services would be our staffing levels at the entities that are actively involved in responding to a public health crisis. So, unlike previous economic downturns, we have personnel that are enforcing safety, and they're out there enforcing safety and out there, doing things that are to support the health and safety of the community. And so I think from an administrative perspective, and I'll defer to Austin on that, we would deem that those types of things would be essential services. And so essential services are what does the community need to sort of just get through, they need for their own, processing birth certificates, things like that need to be maintained. Austin, is there anything you would want to say on essential services? I don't want to speak for you.
Muted. Sorry about that. I was muted. Yeah, I mean, sorry, I got a glare on my face. It's really what Anna was hitting on previously in terms of what can keep our community healthy and safe during a public health emergency. So during the first initial closure of a lot of municipal buildings and stuff like that, beyond closing them to the public, it was initially public safety, public works, and the public health department. We have kind of expanded that outside of that a little bit. We have tried very hard to allow as many employees to work remotely or work from home as possible. That, honestly, in this situation is the best way that I can keep my employees healthy and safe, is honestly keeping them out of the office. Although we have had a fair amount of reduction in the foot traffic that's happening in municipal buildings, we've still been doing a ton of work. So we've been paying everyone during this, and we've had decent expectations for all of our employees and what we're expecting them to perform during this so far. We're going to have people come back to the office at some point in time, but what we really need to put first is working within the guidelines of the state concerning what is a safe workplace. So, you know, they can say 25%. Is that 25% of occupancy, or is that 25% of a person's personal square footage that they could use within the building and things like that? So we are working as hard as possible to assess which departments we can have come work, but we're also trying to work as hard as possible simultaneously to figure out how to provide the community with a decent level of service when we don't necessarily have confidence of a date that the public will be allowed to come back into our buildings in any fashion. So we've been working pretty hard to, we have some essential in-person people, but a fair amount of people, they're still considered essential employees. They're just working remotely and providing a different type of service.
Okay, I'm going to go back to my initial question because neither one of you have answered it. You're going to take $750,000 out of the stabilization fund. What happens next year when we need $750,000?
So our expectation, Karen, would be that FY22, unless we are still in this current situation, that the revenues that we're downgrading now would not be down. We would be recovering. We'd be experiencing a recovery, so those revenues would not necessitate and need the revenues. We would not have to go to the rainy day fund for the revenue because the revenue would be there in the historic categories in which it has been otherwise. So, for example, our stated numbers hopefully would be recovering by then. But to be totally candid, where I sit right now, I will assume that there may need to be some level of weaning ourselves off of that transfer in FY22, perhaps maybe a transfer of like $300,000 next year, unless we rebound very strongly. But I would assume that the rebound it completely depends on how well we rebound, both the state and our local receipts. If our local receipts, you know, people have been cooped up, whatever happens, things take a turn for the best in terms of the public health situation. People get out there, people are rehired, people are spending money, our excise taxes go well up, and we kind of catch up on things. Then that should, you know, that should help us make progress there. And then if the state does well and they catch us up, you know, and they make a good investment in local aid in Chapter 70, that should remedy much of those funds. Is there a situation in which it doesn't fully remedy it? Certainly. And so that we would need to potentially tap into, I would not envision us needing to go anywhere close to what this current transfer is, but there is a scenario that I can easily see where we need to potentially transfer some portion of that just to kind of incrementally wean ourselves off as the economy is recovering. And if I could just say one thing, just to add on to Austin, when we're talking about essential, there's also sort of just a higher construct of essential. So when I'm using the word essential in this memo, I'm meaning things like just delivering services to the community that the community sort of needs to function. You know, public safety services, you know, things that folks need in terms of, you know, that are required under law on their end. And so that's what I'm talking about is just, you know, and I think pretty much we would assume that most of the services that the town is providing are essential. That's why they are there. But when I'm using that word essential, that's what I'm talking about. And there's an important distinction with like when we're talking about folks sort of in and out of the office, how we're talking about sort of what duties they're performing. Karen, did I answer your question though in terms of the 750?
Well, again, I mean, I'll be here next year.
Yeah,
I think.
I hope I am too.
And I mean, you know, we're going to be able to replace that money using, you know, anything extra that we have coming in. Joe, free cash, we might not even get $700,000 total in free cash. We might even get $500,000. And there's a formula. There's a formula that the council has to go by. X amount goes here, X amount goes there. I mean, I am just, I guess I'm just in awe. You know,
Karen, I guess I would just suggest that if we don't use this money for this, what is it for?
Oh, I understand. No, I understand that, Anna.
Yeah. And that's that's the purpose of the responsible budgeting is to set those. You'll be shocked. Winthrop deserves a ton of credit, and the council deserves a ton of credit for the fact that it had proactively set up these reserve funds, because there are many communities out there that do not have reserve funds and they just have their free cash rolling every year. And some of them have very healthy balances and they would just pull from their free cash. But this provides a much more visible and transparent way to plan for these types of downturns. And you have those things really formally set away with, you know, a strict conversation about before you would tap into it. And so it's really only in the dire circumstances that we should be having conversations about pulling from the general stabilization fund. And we believe that we're in one of those situations right now, unfortunately.
Okay.
So a couple.
I agree
yep.
with Anna on this. Karen and I were around many years ago when the town of Winthrop did not have any reserves, did not have a stabilization fund, used all this free cash for the next year budget. And we were on the old advisory committee at the time, and we proposed the first stabilization account back prior to the current form of town government. That's how far back this goes. To see it up at $2,408,000 is fantastic compared to a lot of the zeros that we're used to seeing year over year. It's unfortunate that we have to dip into it for $750,000, but it's equally as fortunate that we have it to dip into. And I guess, as Anna said, if we're not going to use it for this now, when? And this is a unique, hopefully, 100-year problem, and we can slowly build the balance back up over the next few years. I just want to put that thought out anyway.
Always the voice of reason, Bob. I hate that in you. So I kind of have the same sentiments as Karen on the 750. It just, if you're not going to use it now, when you're going to use it. But that money is also used to make our bond rating what it is. And for example, on the schools has saved us over $12 million in interest payments because we had, and I don't want to say substantial reserves, but adequate reserves. I have a bunch of questions, but if we have been averaging over the last 3 years, roughly, I mean, it's a little higher, but roughly 1.5, 1.7 million in free cash.
Yep.
If that's the case, wouldn't we be assuming that if we're budgeting the way we were, we're going to have, assuming this didn't happen, if we budgeted the way we were probably going to have 1.7 again in free cash. So if that's a logical way of thinking, which I think it is, because it's been pretty consistent, wouldn't, and I'm not saying we obviously have to make some adjustments, but wouldn't we be thinking that there's at least 1.5 million, and I don't want to say fluff, I don't want to say waste in any way, shape, or form, but if we've been averaging over budgeting basically by 1.5, 1.7 million, why would we think that wouldn't have been the case now, that we would say, hey, we're not going to probably have any free cash next year. We're just going to appropriate accordingly. I hate taking 750,000. That's 30% out of that one fund. It's like Anna said, it's only 15% of total, but I would like to see, and just a quick question, a side bit here. We're assuming through all this that the school appropriation has stayed the same at the 800. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I wanted to make that. I really want to call that out for folks that none of the cuts that we're proposing touch the school department. So basically, to the extent that the state is cutting our Chapter 70, that would sort of be that the Chapter 70 would be losses there would be made up. It's fungible, but we made up with the stabilization fund transfer and or cuts at the town, basically. And
I do think we've done some stuff through the SBAC that will help the schools. However, the schools are going to need to cut at least $500,000 from their budget. Now that's which is why more than likely going to involve, we talk about unemployment, how we're trying to eliminate it, but we're one town. It's the schools and the town together. We're one. So it does look like unemployment's going to be out there on the horizon, or job losses. Now, have we even looked at the possibility or to see what the economic impact would be? And I don't, again, like Austin said and Anna said, everything's basically a shot in the dark because we don't know. Should we or could we at least run numbers to assume what would happen if, for example, and I'm just throwing this out there, senior center and library open January 1st. If we're saying, hey, I'm sorry.
We've basically run every scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot more for us to talk about it up top. I think we'll get to some of that. And and I'll go back up so I can just explain what all of that is. And to show you that it's actually it's already kind of in here. It actually is in here. So and just a quick point, just to provide clarity to Councilor Terry's question about the free cash. So to be totally candid, a lot of the money that comes in that's from turnbacks on the appropriation side, that's a lot of it is turnover savings. So for example, we had substantial understaffing in the fire department and the public works last year. And so we had quite a bit of money come back there. And so when folks leave and there's a gap and when we hire them back up, you can actually generate quite a lot of savings there, both for their salaries and also their associated health insurance. And so we have to sort of budget off of what the full staffing that's assumed under the department model that's approved sort of as part of the budget. And so to the extent that folks come off and then back on later, and when we hire people at a lower rate, for example, that's some of the savings. I will say, to the extent that there was some of that ability to have some more turnover savings, Austin's original budget captures a lot of that already, because I sat with Steve Calla at Public Works, and we discussed, timing of backfills and taking savings based on saying to him, you know what, you have positions that aren't filled right now. We need to sort of discuss like managing to a certain number and you filling those when you are able to manage to this number. And same, similar conversations with other departments. And so to the extent that in the past, we've been able to generate turnover savings that have then gone to help pay at the end of the year to clean up where maybe there were more costs than anticipated, that will be harder going forward, because we've kind of taken that already in the budget for this year. And then just on the free cash, it's both the above revenues and it's any turnbacks that we generate net of other issues. So for example, this year, our enterprise funds, those that have deficits beyond what are in their retained earnings, the general fund is likely our free cash will likely absorb those reductions. So, and that's another issue for next year that we're working on, because that would be a similar situation next year as well. So, really quickly I'll talk about these two things together, I guess. So, there are specific line item reductions that we are recommending that are in the attached spreadsheets. You can see specifically where we've taken those. Those are things to eliminating conference fees. I took a 10% cut to everybody's office supplies except Austin's. You got a much deeper cut. Sorry, Austin. And I think I might have given myself a little bit more of a cut as well. We are zeroing out the funding that had been set aside in a reserve for increases for unions for FY21. Any new contract does not need to be appropriated until sort of further in the process. So we believe that the economic conditions under which any previous conversations were occurring for anything that would impact FY21 has sort of changed. And so we are setting those funds, we are zeroing out those funds and looking to have conversations with unions about that. Fuel savings, gas prices are wonderfully low right now from a consumer perspective. We're going to assume that we will recoup some of those savings there. We are recommending savings from seeking other funding for the Chromebooks, which we believe, we believe that there is other funding that exists out there from state or federal funding that we can pull down for that. We recommended, based on feedback that we had heard from the town council and interest in doing a beach study, we're suggesting sort of setting that to the side for now and seeking out other opportunities to fund that that does not use general fund money. I looked back at the GIC and I went as low as I can possibly go on that. And took another $15,000 there. Our payments to vets, those has been trending downward, and so took another $5,000 there. Cutting actual funds for positions that were planned to be filled that we will delay filling. The planners that Austin has spoken about, delaying that hiring by 6 months, and then delaying an AP clerk in my office by 6 months. So those are physical cuts to the budget, which result in $319,000 and $350.50 in savings. Items that we're not recommending specific downward adjustments in the budget for right now are certain spending freezes. So we are having conversations about freezing our non-union longevity, which we believe would save around $13,000. It actually might be more than that. We were in the process of calculating that. It could actually be closer to $20,000. And we are also working through planning right now on some staffing contingencies with entities that are likely to have potentially reduced hours as a result of the social distancing requirements. That is still sort of in review with legal counsel and others, so we don't have the full details of those to discuss tonight because there are other parties that we are working to loop in on those conversations. But those get at the types of things that Councilor Lettieri was discussing. And so we are assuming those as well. And so I just want to make a really clear distinction though. The revenues, the line item reductions, and the turnback solutions total are the items that clear up sort of the underlying revenue and spending gap in terms of that additional MIA non-renewal appropriation. The spending freeze non-cuts of 218, those tie out, and if you look at the bottom, we've oversolved by about 217. It's just off by a little bit. We've oversolved with these contingency plans to offset against those likely reductions in those other local receipts that we've talked about up here, that are these items here, the penalties and interest fees, departmental fines, forfeits, Medicaid, that we're not saying we should take down here, that we should instead watch very carefully and implement contingency planning to accommodate what we believe will be downgrades there as well. So I'm just going to stop there because that's a lot to digest.
And a quick question on, for example, the Chromebooks. Now, originally in the budget, that was part of the capital, right? Taken out of one of the reserve funds. So
actually, sorry, Counselor, I didn't mean to cut you off. That one, the Chromebooks in the study are actually, so you may recall that we had Austin had made a commitment that first year, or so that first new year going from 19 to 20, when our Massport pilot money increased by 150, that we would set that aside annually to fund capital programs, to fund capital projects. The Chromebooks and the beach study were two items that were designated for funding out of that pilot money. So that's ongoing general fund money that we think should support ongoing general fund items right now in light of where things stand. And so those would not impact a transfer. The items that were teed up for transfer were for other items, unless I completely misread what I did.
Now, because there were Chromebooks for roughly that amount that's in the capital plan, correct? That was taken.
Yeah, so what we would do,
okay.
Those were paid with, they were in the capital plan, but the source of funding was that sort of pilot, that little amount of the ongoing pilot money that we had set to the side as like a little capital reserve. And so we would just say, unfortunately, we would maintain two other items there.
All the way across the beach. So they got to work around.
Somebody has their
mic on.
Their mic.
Oh, sorry. So the other capital items are the ones that were the Chromebooks and the beach. There were four things spun out of the 150. It was Chromebook, beach study, police cruiser, and sidewalk supplement. The sidewalk supplement and the police cruiser feel like things that should be maintained for various public safety reasons. And the Chromebook, since we believe we can accommodate those, again, it's an item that we believe would be eligible for certain funding that's currently available to us. And so we would like to take that route, as it would not be at a cost, we believe, to the town. And the beach study, we think, is something that we could pursue, potentially investigating other funds to support that through potential other grants or other opportunities that exist with other entities to help us accommodate something like that. So that frees up about, I think it's $53,000.
Now, what about the police cruiser that's coming out of that money? You don't feel that that's something we could hold off for a year?
I think in light of just I think I would defer to the chief on that, but my understanding was that we really try to adhere to that that every year replacement.
I think we'd like to do that on a lot of things, but I think we're in dire times. And if I could find $57,000 to reduce the transfer from stabilization, I think that's something that should be on the table anyway.
As would maybe that 50,000 from last year for the engine that we never purchased for the fire department.
So that 50,000 has to be used for specific capital purposes because it's that sale of land money. So unfortunately, we can't use that money to close the budget gap, as far as I know. We would have to either return it to that fund. It will, as of right now, it's just sitting, waiting to be reappropriated for potentially for a new fire engine. If the council determines it does not want to reappropriate it, we would, I believe there's a way for us to return
I'm
it
not
to
saying
that
we
fund.
don't need it, but
Yeah.
like Jimmy was saying, is it essential this year as opposed to taking money out of the stabilization fund? I know what you're saying is a technicality that we can't put that back into general payment. I had one other question, Jim, if you're done. I'm just on the longevity, the freeze for non-union longevity.
Yep.
So that's going forward. So
it's actually saying, and this is confusing, and I realized right before I got on this call that I did not title this in a way that was most helpful. So that would basically say there would not be non-union longevity payments this year, unless, basically what I'm saying, freezing it would say, like, if we get, very far into the year and our revenues are performing perfectly fine, then it's a conversation to release the longevity payments. We are actually, I should say, still researching this, but otherwise it would just say keep them appropriated, but they normally are paid in July, and that they would not be paid in July for FY21, and they may not be paid at all.
Are those contractual, like, we have an obligation for those, or is that more like a cost of living? Or?
So these ones are for non-union, non-contracted employees. And so we are also just researching whether there's anything we have on file that dictates that the non-union employees must get their longevity payments. So we are researching that, but we wanted to tee it up as one of our contingencies that we're researching right now.
And just to reiterate what Anna was saying, all of these are contingencies that we're investigating. We're trying as much as possible to look at every available option that we have to reduce the amount that we're committed to spending, while simultaneously keeping on the same staffing numbers.
Anna, it's Karen again. The harbor dredging feasibility, that was the study to do it. Can that be used towards dredging? Because I know the harbor master mentioned that when he was in, that he's going to have to do some dredging down there.
I think we would consider that would be something that would be a different. We would say that in light of where we're looking, in light of how things are looking in terms of the budget gap, we would recommend that be most pertinently used to help close that gap, and then work, with the harbor master in the future to kind of work through what he's looking at and figure out where funds could come from to support further efforts on that.
Right.
There's been no recent spending on it, so that just as a CFO, that indicates to me that if there was recent spending, then that's an ongoing urgent priority. I have not seen any recent spending on it, so that indicates to me that it's something that is more urgently spent to make sure we aren't laying people off.
Right, and the other thing was too, as far as the fire engine and a police vehicle is concerned, you know what, I can't see that we could cut back on not getting a police vehicle, because we got into too many problems a few years ago with the vehicles that they were using. They were unsafe, and we had to play catch up. And the fire chief has quite a plan to be able to get another new fire engine for a decent amount of money and not cost the town a lot of money. So we need to remember that too, as far as that 50,000 is concerned, because he does need another new truck. Isn't he still using a Boston truck?
Yep.
As a loaner?
He's using yeah, he's using the borrowed one. And I think on the police cruiser side of things, I think just following along with the sort of risk mitigation philosophy that Austin and I have been applying to the budget this year, that replacement of that cruiser just sort of fits in with just having that regular schedule to ensure that we aren't falling behind and opening ourselves up to any kind of risk that could come as a result of that. And on the fire engine piece, that 50,000, I would just say, the way that I think about that 50,000 is it's just in a total different category of its own, because it is that restricted money. And the fire chief does have that proposal. We don't have to act on that immediately, but that money is kind of set aside because it can only be used for certain things. And so it's sort of off to the side.
My only thing is, I realize we're going to need that truck down the road, but it's 50,000. So it's, we'll appropriate it down the road sometime, but if we need it now, why not spend it now? That's all. So just a thought.
And a quick, go ahead, Jen, you haven't had a
Thanks,
chance.
Jim. So Anna, on the staffing contingencies, is that a number that looks at a year's worth? I mean, what sort of timing is there built into that number?
There is, it's a couple different sets of times based on a few different scenarios for a couple different entities in town. And I'm sorry I'm being a little bit vague. It's because we are still working this through and don't want to surprise folks involved with information that they have not been part of conversations on. So it involves, there are some of the numbers behind that number assume 6 months. Some numbers assume closer to a year. There are also there are just various scenarios we're running through. But so there are, I would say, it's not like a 1 month assumption. It's a multi-month assumption for various entities involved in that number.
Okay.
And I will say,
and they assume that is in effect as of July 1?
I would suggest that to the extent that we would need to make any assumptions that would involve a 12-month scenario, should it involve conversations about furloughs or reduced schedules, which are similar, that those are things that we would want, I believe, to have teed up for implementation on July 1, and that are the kind of things that would be better to then, rather having to ramp them up later in the year, which would cause a deeper, I think, potentially reduction in hours, to implement sooner so we get the full benefit. And if things turn out better, potentially ramp those right back up. And hence why I'm recommending we don't cut the other line items that would be relevant to this conversation, so that if we get into October, November, or whenever it may be, and things are trending, fingers crossed, if this could be reality, I hope it is, things are trending well with public health, revenues are looking okay, okay, for those that we may have made some adjustments to, please come back on, and then the appropriation would allow for that, basically.
That's exactly what I'm referring to. Thank you.
Anna, on the union negotiations, the 150?
Yep.
Okay, so my understanding is you're saying that that's, for any potential adjustment in 21. But are all unions under contract now for fiscal 20? Isn't that money potentially used to, clean out fiscal 20 if there was a retro or something like that? Are you just assuming nothing, no negotiation? Well, I know you're not assuming no negotiations, but wasn't that money potentially used for fiscal 20?
So Anna, I can answer this one. We are in contract with every union through 19, except for police patrol. That's actually and lieutenants are the only ones that were out. We're signed on with MOUs library as well for 19. For 20, we have an MOA with the AFSCME union, which represents our laborers and public works. But beyond that, we're only at the table with the other units for 20 through 22. We're looking at a 3-year period. Honestly, we're going to have to re-explore our strategies with all of the unions, and we will most likely be in contact with the AFSCME union, looking at potentially reopening the agreement. We are looking as hard as possible at what we can have as a flat year for 21, and potentially some type of one-time payment for 20 that we can afford and wrap our heads around. But we are really looking as hard as possible at keeping people's salaries as close to the same as possible, and limiting the impacts of the year-over-year changes to the best of our abilities.
Yeah, I understand that, and I know you really can't get into negotiations, and nor should you over a Zoom call. But I just wanted to make sure that if there's some sort of agreement on 20, forget about 21, there's still potentially money that we'll need to find somewhere.
So we're gonna. Yeah, and so one of my strategies with this, in all honesty, is going to be a real hard conversation of are we going to look at this in terms of salary staying flat, or are we going to talk about potential staff reductions? And it's a kind of binary choice that we can talk about the size of the individual groups, or we can talk about how much individual members are being compensated. It's going to be the same amount of money either way. So in my mind, I'm going to try to be as humble as I can in negotiations, but we're at a point that we don't have a lot of confidence that we're going to be able to sign on to any agreement that looks like it's going to have salary increases for any of our bargaining units for 21.
So, and just to sort of put a point on part of that there are no contracts currently in place for FY20 that have an impact on FY21. So that $150,000 would have been for new things that occur that would be impacting FY21, but there are no contracts to date which have a cost in them that has occurred in 20, and that 100 that would then have a carryover effect in 21. For the 150, thus it has no, that's a pure FY21. That those funds were set aside purely for an FY21 discussion.
All right. Well, I mean, reality is if you did settle for 20 during this year in a normal year, you would need money to pay that retro. But since and obviously we're talking, and I think correctly with Austin and Anna, just saying that, you know, the truth is what the truth is. And there's some hard decisions we would have to make, and trying to keep everybody's job, which is why, you know, one of the other things here, the planner to delay it 6 months, I think it's foregone that it should be delayed a year. Because not only does that save the 47.5, but it also probably potentially saves 7, 8, 9,000 in benefits, and the same with the clerk. Both positions that, you know, you could argue very good on that we could use, but you know, the reality is we are where we are. I mean, you know, I look at the health department with Meredith, and I look at you know, code enforcement, and think those are two things that are extremely important and needed. And you know, I think that's potentially another 67.5 plus benefits. Well, maybe not benefits for the part-time, but benefits for the planner that should be delayed until next July.
Just one little quick plug on my clerk. My department is very stressed. So I guess I would just put it as a department head, in addition to a CFO. To the 6 months it's already been extremely painful the past 2 months, and my staff has been incredible. Envisioning going 12 months without filling that role,
it's tough. It's hard, just like it's hard for the code enforcement and unfortunately for Meredith right now. I mean, it's all hard decisions that we all have to make, but. I do thank you guys for, you know, this is a pretty quick turnaround in less than a week. I know you've been working on it probably for longer, but, you know, I applaud you for coming to the table with, you know, a balanced budget, some way, shape, or form. We could agree to disagree on some of the numbers, but it's a balanced budget, and probably better than a lot of other communities can say right now. So I do thank you for that.
And I just, one last really quick plug on my clerk, that that position is only open because I had such a talented clerk that the fire chief got her when he lost his clerk. So that role is normally one that is fully filled, and is extremely critical and active role. So keeping it unfilled for, it would be 9 months at that point. Just an FYI. I would put in a please, begging, please do not take that away further than that. Thank you. Okay, so I think we've talked through all of the solutions, and let me just see what else we talked about. The stabilization fund. Yeah, I think that's the bulk of it. So just, it's the, again, these contingencies up here to freeze spending result in this additional sort of, I don't want to call it an oversolve, but it's a positive variance to address the other revenues that are likely to be under, that I don't think we should put in right now, because if we put those underperforming revenues in now, then we have to make those physical cuts to those other departments. And I don't think that that's a step that maybe is appropriate at this time. it feels very preliminary in the crisis to potentially be going to that level of depth, and it would impede the town's flexibility to bring folks back up and on, assuming we implement these contingencies. If we've gone and cut those budgets, but otherwise the spreadsheet that's attached memo, you can go through and you can see where all of these adjustments have been made. There's an expense tab in the spreadsheet, and there's a revenue tab, so you can see where these 4 things are then added in. I have in highlighted yellow where the changes are so you can see where those are.
Anna,
so
can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
And I just remember going through this last year, the pension funding, you know, if I remember correctly, Winthrop was ahead of the game in comparison to most other municipalities our size. And so I'm a, you know, rating agency, you know, what's more important to me at this time, cash on the balance sheet as opposed to stringing out additional liabilities. You know, is that true or not?
That's a great question. I think it's a little bit tricky. So we, on the retirement board, we did some research. So we actually previously, Winthrop was going to be fully funded on a forward funding schedule as of 2028. We're now at 2029 because when we keep doing, it feels like each year when we do our actuarial analysis, the mortality rates keep getting pushed out further. So the liability keeps getting bigger. We're making strides where it's like 2 steps forward and a half a step back. There are some conversations happening with the state right now because, as you can imagine, other communities that don't have as well of a plan as Winthrop does for retirement, they're asking, you know, can the state make some accommodations to the requirement that we be fully funded in the next few years, because this is starting to get to be unrealistic. Excuse me. It's unclear if the state is willing to take something like that up, but from a rating agency's perspective, I guess in the long run, it looked like when we did some analysis about pushing out our funding dates to sort of the kind of to later within what the statute allows, it only sort of really saves us, I think, and Karen, you might remember more specifically than I think around $50,000 a year. And so it felt that for $50,000, that level of change did not seem equitable in terms of the potential risk to our sort of the positive we gain by being so proactive on that. But I think it's a fair point, you know, does the $750,000, how does that counteract that? I guess what I would say is we've had as Councilor Terry and others have noted, we've had really healthy free cash the past couple of years, and our undesignated fund balances were lower when we got that, when we've had our most recent bond rating. So to the extent that we've grown them and we're now taking some out, I think I would have to go back and check, but I believe we're still in a healthy position above where we even were at that point. And so I feel comfortable assuming that the transfer would be better received than if we were to push the pension funding. I think the pension fund schedule has a multi-year effect, where the stabilization fund transfer, our goal is this is a one-time thing. Assuming, you know, if we come out strong, it might have to be a 2-time thing if FY22, if this lingers for quite some time, but that it's intended to be a very short-term, less fiscal year impact, that keeping the pension funding schedule kind of preserves that longer-term financial health in a better way than taking transfers from the rainy day fund. I guess I'm going to assume the state will be making a healthy transfer from its rainy day fund. So I'm thinking if they're, you know, that they're going to be doing that, I think it's not inconsistent for us to be having the conversation as well.
You know, I think it was like only around 35 or 40,000, you know, I don't even think it was up 60,000 that we would
Yeah, you might be right. It might be right.
It was not a lot of money. I know that.
Yeah.
I mean, we all thought it was going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it wasn't.
Have we made any adjustments to OPEB?
No.
No, so we had actually not been making any contributions to OPEB since the FY18 budget.
Right, which we're going to have to do something.
Yeah, and so that's so one of the fiscal policies that's appended to the town manager's budget submission actually suggests that we adopt as a policy that once we have reached full funding for pensions, that year-over-year change is redirected to start making the more substantial payments for OPEB. I think the rating agencies would love that. and that would start tackling our liability in a meaningful way. Our liability is around $80 million, and we have like $379,000 set aside for that. So it was a great approach that the council was appropriating about $75,000 there annually, but in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't necessarily making headway. And so I think ensuring we get the pensions funded as soon as we can, and then taking those funds and then directing those into OPEB, I think actually gets us there faster.
So Anna, it's Jan again. I just want to say that I agree with your strategic approach to the items that we might need to deal with because of the revenue reduction. And I'm really appreciative of all of clearly the deep thought that's gone into this situation. Clearly it's very challenging, but you've explained all of it very well, and it's clear you've thought through many alternatives, so thank you.
Thanks, Jan. I appreciate that. I appreciate everyone's perspectives that have informed this. I think the conversations with the department heads and all of you have helped Austin and I think about, have helped us identify what the priorities are for folks, and so that can inform the way that we approach sort of what's important and what things we can maybe have to get moved down the list just in light of where things are.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop sharing if that's okay with everybody. Do folks want to continue looking at this table? Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing. Okay.
Yeah, just a question on your other graph, the one that shows the departmental adjustments and changes. Is that?
Yeah.
So let's say that the police department shows a $500 decrease in office supplies. Would that mean that budget has gone down by the $500 over the original budget?
Exactly. You know what? I'll pull that up so folks can see what I'm talking about. Let me just see if I can find 1 second. Yeah, I just want to make sure everyone can read that spreadsheet okay. Here they are. So let's see what editing. All right, I'm going to share my screen one more time. Okay, so I'm just going to shrink this so we can see a little bit better here. Oh, you know what? I forgot to take something. Oh, that's okay. I was going to clean this up a little bit more for you. I'm actually just going to hide. I'm going to hide all of these things so we can see this better. Okay. So you have an expenses tab and then you have a revenues tab. So on the expenses tab, this is showing what the original appropriation amount would be based on Austin's original submission, and then this is showing what the revised amount would be. So the ones that are highlighted in yellow show that actually town council hopefully is not upset with me. I have zeroed out the town council's conference ability to pay conference fees next year. That's what this is showing. So it's showing council, I gave them a 10% cut to their office supplies as well, zeroed out the town manager's conference fees, et cetera, et cetera. Here's took a deeper cut from the town manager's office supplies. Here's where you can see the delay in the backfill for the planner. Here's where you can see the delay in the backfill for the clerk, et cetera, et cetera. So this is basically, if it's just a dash, that means a zero. So previous appropriation was $415 for conference fees for my office. The new appropriation is zero. There would not be an appropriation for any conference fees for next year. So that's how to read those changes. And then the same thing, and then in revenues, it's a similar thing where you can see here's the downgrade. Whoops, sorry about that. Here's the downgrade to our Chapter 70. So here was the Chapter 70 number off of which we used for Austin's original budget. Why is this like this? And then here is the new recommendation. You can see it's the FY19 actual, and then that's the downgrade to revenue. Here's the unrestricted government aid, that's the downgrade. And then here's the excise taxes. And then did I forget to highlight an excise tax? Nope, the other one is down here. Here's motor vehicle. And then down here you can see the stabilization fund transfer coming in as a positive. So that's why it's offsetting up here. These are downwards. These are revenues that are coming in to help deal with that. Here's the stabilization transfer. And then here are the other, for those that are savvy, you can click in here and you can see those are the numbers from the, this is the dredging, plus the other special article for town manager recruitment, plus the safer grant.
One thing with this as well, and I know Anna's kind of clicking around in Excel pretty quickly. She set all of these up to like sort and filter. That's what the little down arrows are for people who aren't familiar. You could throw this into what's called a pivot table as well and sort things by departments. If anyone needs any help on that, just email Anna and I offline. We can help walk you through it. If you could, one of the easy ways to look at expenses is you just click over by variance. You take anything other than a value of 0, and you can see where all of the changes were made, type of thing. So you can kind of sort and filter it by department, however you want to do it. And if you take out that 0 and the blanks like Anna has, you can see that's where all the changes are by department type of thing. So again, trying to be open and transparent with this stuff. If anyone needs help using the tools, please let us know. We're here to help you and help inform you, and again, help try to facilitate this decision-making process.
And I can, for those that are not comfortable at all in Excel, just ping me and I can even make this a PDF and send it around as a PDF for folks as well. For those that don't want to explore, sort and filter. Happy to make it a PDF if that's easier for people too.
Anna, one quick question on one thing that you haven't really touched on, and there's got to be some sort of impact, is unemployment. You know, there has to be some sort of impact now, and will be some sort of impact. And I know we keep talking about not laying off, but there were part-timers that are, you know, there's a lot going on that needs to be addressed some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, completely. And it's, I will say that that is still an issue that I'm doing a deeper dive on. So the contingencies there, they somewhat take into account, but not fully, the potential unemployment ramifications. And so I'm still evaluating that because I believe that there maybe have some changes potentially have been made that we're researching on our obligations in light of the COVID-19 crisis in terms of legislation that has passed. So we're just researching to make sure that we have a full understanding of what potential costs we would be incurring. I believe that there's also, it may be something that's also just pending that I've heard in conversations that municipalities have been requesting of the state. So while we're working through the contingencies, I've got like a little bit set to the side, assuming that we would need to be mindful of the unemployment costs, but is that sort of out to the penny? It's not close to that right now. That's something that we're working on over the next sort of week or two.
Anna and our HR director, Stacy Calla, have been working pretty hard. Well, Stacy specifically has been working hard on every unemployment request that's come in during this time. This is one of those times you kind of have to be extra scrupulous with these things and check them pretty closely, because we're finding people that may have been employed by us years ago looking for unemployment and things like that. So we're trying as hard as possible to weed out any people that we may have issues with. And again, just like anything, it's helping us kind of re-clarify how we want to do things and some of our processes internally, because we've never necessarily had a deluge of employees or unemployment claims coming in all at once. So again, it helps us reflect on our own process. And Stacy's done a pretty good job working with Anna on this, I would say.
And just one other note on this, to the extent that I went down $15,000 on GIC, there is only a tiny bit of contingency in there that we really would be using to pay for snow and ice next year, to the extent that that is above our budget, which is typically where it is. I also was assuming that to the extent that as time marches on, if there are further employment claims beyond what we could reasonably anticipate, that any excess at GIC would then need to be utilized for transferring into the unemployment lines to deal with that. And so I'm kind of using that as sort of just a backstop against those types of situations that we don't fully budget up front for snow and ice, and it's a little bit hard right now to fully contemplate the potential full ramifications of our unemployment contributions. So that's sort of there to kind of to sort of address that. And on the school side, knowing that they are running through exercises, determining where they need to be, I wanted to be particularly careful about not going any further on GIC, so that we, once sort of things kind of land in place a little bit more, we will have sufficient funds set aside in the budget to deal with all of that.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I wanted just, if I could, if we're all done with this discussion, I'd like to switch it a bit. And this is something that I know is a hot spot. That's the water and sewer. And I know that we've, yeah, I think we had a nice reduction in the assessments from the original estimated budget. And it looks as though the increase is going to be something like 220,000 in the total budget versus the 383 number. I guess my question is, if those numbers are accurate, are we still having to consider a rate increase for next year, or are we going to be able to keep things stable? I'm just throwing it out as a question.
Yes, we will have to still consider a rate increase. Between the projects that we already have on the books and the increased debt, we're going to have to consider it. And this is something I was trying to caution last year when I made the $3 increase. That was only 7-8 months after Chief Delahanty, when he was the acting town manager, and he had been in the unenviable position of increasing water rates due to a lack of attention to the water rates over time, and moving away from kind of small incremental increases into some of the more drastic increases that we faced last year. And even previously there was rate reductions, which I'm unfamiliar with. This is the only place that I've ever seen a water rate reduced due to perceived savings. This is something that I really am kind of adamant about, that this should be $1 a year. It should be consistent as an increase. We will continue to be taking on debt to fix the infrastructure in town concerning the water sewer infrastructure, along with all of the EPA related stormwater fees that will be coming online based off the MS4 permit, not this fiscal year, but in fiscal 22. So this is something that just like kind of Prop 2.5, it's going to keep going up. Until there's a day that our infrastructure is built out in Winthrop, it's going to be very hard to not have to continue to take this kind of advantageous debt on that we're allowed to take SRF loans and things like that for pretty good terms. It would behoove the community to continue to invest in its water sewer infrastructure, because those fixes, when it's a sinkhole and a busted pipe, those types of things are costly and can, again, wreck stabilization funds and things like that. So I think it's very prudent to continue to invest in the infrastructure. Keep it with, again, $1 increase. You can, from everything we've talked about, you can accommodate everything in the next fiscal year under $1 increase. I would think that the year after that, you're looking at another $1 increase as well. And I think that some type of stable increase happening year over year is something that I personally think that the town and the water sewer department should be projecting out to the community, that this will continue to be something that's increased over time. In town, there's still 80% of the water sewer lines still need to be replaced. So there's still a fair amount of work to be done all over town for the water sewer infrastructure. And that is slow, hard, expensive work to be done, unfortunately.
I think
if I could just
go ahead, Anna.
Sorry, Bob. Just to add a couple sort of really specific financial items to that. One, Director Calla and I actually had a Zoom meeting last week, and we went back through his budget and continued to kick the tires on each of his line items. We were evaluating where he was landing for 20 and then talking about 21, being really mindful of the concerns that folks have raised about making sure that we are really budgeting to the penny there in terms of what is absolutely necessary. And so he and I have discussed recommending that there was a reserve line in his operating budget that he recommended increasing by $20,000 so that it provides a way for him to go for projects that come up, so he doesn't have to hit his retained earnings. We discussed level funding that, so that would save $20,000. And I have a little proposal to put forward on this. I didn't want to mix it in with the other items tonight because those are all general fund. I didn't want to get them conflated. So we were able to find that $20,000. That won't mitigate the need to have the rate conversation. I also went through and did an analysis that I can send to all of you on the new debt service and what that's for. And we have borrowed for those projects that have been previously authorized by town council. I can quickly tell you what those are so you know the types of things we're talking about. The new debt service, which is other than the increase for the assessment, which thankfully is now much less than previously expected. The other new growth in the water sewer fund is for the MWRA water bond for lead line replacement project. Debt service payments in 21 are $48,785. There's another lead line, and so some of these are at the timing when they were borrowed. The sort of the bigger, that one I believe is actually an FY 19 or 20 that's coming on in 21. Another lead line replacement, debt service payments for that are $69,000 in FY 21. Inflow infiltration assessment, debt service in FY 21 is $14,925. Palmyra and Crescent Street Sewer Improvement Project, the debt service for that is $15,244. Another MWRA sewer project for inflow infiltration, debt service for that is $12,975. And then there is an older water sewer project from FY 17 or 18, I'll have to go back and check, that were financed previously by something called a bond anticipation note, a BAN, for those that are familiar with that term. That's a short-term borrowing. You're able to roll some of that in future years before you have to start making principal payments, but we have to start making principal payments now, and that's $70,000. So those are all items that those are all projects that have been previously approved by town council. So those are that's the new growth in terms of when I say growth in expenditures that the water sewer fund is facing. So to the extent that there are new projects coming on, they're for lead line replacement, and they're to deal with infiltration issues, and also to deal with where we're having sort of sewer issues in certain areas of town. The Palmyra and Crescent Street improvement projects, that tackles that. That's also just tied to one of the reasons why we prioritize those projects. Also just ties into our insurance issues that we've been having, trying to mitigate any sewer backups, also trying to mitigate any possible water main breaks, those types of things. Previously, the town was experiencing those, I think, at a level that was not satisfactory to our insurer. So some of this is also tied to making some investments there to hopefully mitigate the risk and mitigate the deductibles we're paying out when things fail. And so those projects, those are why those have been identified. Also, the lead line replacement is that's a state mandate. And I believe the infiltration, I would defer to Director Calla on that, but I believe that there are steps we have to take in those in order to meet other mandates, but I don't know those off the top of my head.
Thank you. I guess my point is that so many of us think of the water and sewer bills and think of the assessment from the MWRA, and we don't realize that all the work that's being done in the center, all of the emergency repairs that are done, even the MWRA work that's done that we share in, we're all benefiting from that. And I think sometimes we're getting off the focus of the assessment and look at what we're actually getting for it besides water. Okay, anybody have any other comments or questions? Excuse me. Okay, well, I guess what we'll do then is we're going to meet again tomorrow night to analyze the information you provided today, Anna, and we have to get ready to make our recommendation to the council so that they'll have something for next Tuesday, I guess, is when they're going to be meeting to do that. So the Finance Commission will be meeting again tomorrow night, and hopefully we'll wrap up all of our thoughts on the process and be able to make our recommendation. In the meantime, if anybody has any questions, feel free to come to me or go directly to Anna just to make sure we're all get the information we need for tomorrow evening.
And Bob, would you and others, would you like me to attend? I'm happy to attend, but if folks want to deliberate sort of without us chiming in, happy to just be on standby for questions, or I'm happy to participate and also just be on standby, but on the Zoom. Whatever works for you all is totally fine on my end.
I'll throw it out to the group. What do you think? No one?
Welcome to come.
My feelings will not be hurt. My feelings are not hurt if you don't.
I think it would be good to have a discussion amongst ourselves.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Anna, we've taken enough of your time.
I would love to have my evening, so thank you very much. But I will be looking at my cell phone in case you need an urgent response on something.
Yeah.
Worst case, we'll come back at you on Thursday morning.
Yeah. I do have one more quick question though, Bob, for Anna before you go. On the nurse, the public health, if I understood you properly, we are able to spend that money, we're able to bring somebody on board as long as it's not on the budget and get reimbursed for it. So the strategy that you're pursuing does not delay bringing an additional employee on board. Is that true?
That's true. So my current recommendation on that would be that we should actually, and Austin, I haven't fully circled with you on this, but we should actually post for that position immediately as we are in the height of the COVID-19 response, and bring that person on board, utilizing, we would recommend to the council utilizing our COVID-19 emergency funds. We have an additional grant that has come up that I think that we can actually push some of the money that we thought we were going to, some of the expenditures that we had originally believed we would need the appropriation from council for. I think we can hit that grant for that, and then use funds that the council has appropriated to us this year to start paying for that person. And then we believe that we should be able to get, based on the analysis I've done of the CARES Act funds, it should be an eligible expenditure in terms of the response that we are having. And so I would suggest that we do that and then continue that as long as we can. I want to be very careful as the chief financial officer to say this, that the CARES Act clearly says that it's not for budgeted items, and our FY21 budget is not done yet. And there are things that we need right now that would roll into 21 that I think we should ensure that we sort of accommodate appropriately. I don't know how to say that differently.
No, I got it. That's great. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, if there's nothing else for Anna or Austin, then we'll move on. We have 2 sets of minutes to approve.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to sign off if that's okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
thank you both.
Have a good night,
Thank you,
everybody.
Anna.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Minutes of May 20th. We have a motion.
Motion.
Second.
Second. All right. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. And then minutes of May 21st. Motion to accept.
Motion to accept.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, so we took care of that. Other than reviewing the material that Anna sent to us earlier, which although we went through it tonight, the other spreadsheet has got a lot of good information. Is there anything else anybody would like to talk about before we sign
No,
off?
Bob Carla did say she could post us for Friday if you think we might need it.
Oh,
Motion.
motion to post for Friday?
No.
No, I think that was just
That was just a suggestion from Carla. If you thought you might need it Friday, she would post it.
or Monday, one or the other. But if we thought I think it would be better to post, and then if we don't need it, we don't need it. But if you don't think we're going to need it, then.
Well, I don't know if we'll need it, but we've got to do the 2-day notice at least.
Right.
I could post for both days. On a Friday.
What?
How does everybody feel about meeting on?
I think we should post them in case we need them.
Do you
Every
really
day's a
know what day
Friday
of the
now.
week it is?
Well, then we post for Monday, and then
We could post for Monday, then we have to make our recommendation very quickly.
okay, Okay,
That's
okay.
the only thing I'm thinking about. We have to get our recommendation to the council before they meet on Tuesday evening.
Well, I think
Okay.
maybe that's why Carla said post for Friday.
I
Yeah.
could post for both if you want. We could post for Friday and
Yeah.
Monday. You could, I mean, it's easy enough to just cancel Mondays if you don't feel that you need it.
Okay, why don't we do that? We'll post for Friday and Monday. If after tomorrow night, we don't think we need anything, fine. If we prefer not to do a, not waste, but, use a Friday night when we could push it to Monday, we can do that. So yeah, why don't we post both nights to be safe, and then we'll make a decision tomorrow night. As to which
Okay.
way we'll go with.
Sounds good.
All right, Carla, do you need anything further from us, or we just be able to do it?
No, we'll, I'll just do it. We're going to be together a lot these next few days.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Hello, good morning, Carla.
We'll post for Friday and Monday, and then we'll figure it out.
Okay, Carla, thank you so much for.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
I mean,
You know what? I've actually loved, for all the years I've worked, I've never admittedly spent this much time with this group watching. And so I've learned a ton. I've learned a
I'm
ton.
getting lost.
No, it's just looking at it from another perspective and diving down deep. I've enjoyed it.
Good. Well,
I don't know.
No
if I'll
question.
enjoy it Friday
Send those
night.
postings along, Carla.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll enjoy it Friday night, but I've enjoyed it thus far.
Motion to adjourn?
okay, second.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, then I'll
Good
see
night,
you
everybody.
tomorrow evening at
Good
6.
night.
Thank you.
Okay, good night all.
Good night.
Night.